Welcome everyone. This is Juan Soto, Microsoft Access MVP and the founder of AccessUserGroups.org. This is our monthly chapter meeting on Access with SQL Server for January 2026. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Today is the third topic for Access with SQL Server Academy. This is a series that we started in September. Our calendar starts in September of every year. And so we part one and part two have already been out there. You can find them on our YouTube channel at AccessUserGroups.org YouTube channel. And today we're talking about leveraging stored procedures and Microsoft Access. This is a topic that's near and dear to me. One of the things that I mentioned at part one, way back in September of last year, was if you really want to turbocharge the relationship between Access and SQL Server, you've got to become a SQL Server developer. And how you do that is by creating stored procedures and using them in Access, right? So we're going to talk about how to create stored procedures and do that. Now, do you have to create stored procedures? No. You don't have to create stored procedures. I know Access developers who've never created stored procedures, never created views. All they do is store the data on SQL Server, and they're able to use the application. That works fine most of the times when it's a local SQL Server in your network. It's something that will work fine. But if you're using Microsoft Azure, that's going to be much more of a problem because Azure is, by definition, much more further away. Your data center is much further away. Unless you live right next to a data center, right? Most likely a data center could be hundreds of miles or even several states away. And you need to optimize that relationship between Access and the data center in the cloud, and store procedures is one way of doing it. Now, we are following a tenet here that I espouse in the first SQL Server Access Academy, which is concentrate processing on the server. Let the server do all the work, right? Now, we talked about this earlier in the session 2, which is views. What are views? They're nothing much more than queries that run on the server. So if you have multiple tables being joined in a query, you create the view on SQL Server, and then you link that view back into Access. And now Access thinks it's just another table in SQL Server. It really is a view. And so you're processing everything. This is how I serve my clients throughout the US at my firm, ITimpact.com. We optimize Access. Access was created way before the internet. And so we know that all the gotchas and all the tips and tricks to be able to get it to work with Azure, which in some cases is not easy, but we try our best to make it happen with a 3-second rule. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Just bear with me while I switch to presenter mode. All right, share. And I use a virtual machine at Windows365.com. Really good prices. It's only $35 a month. And so let me go ahead and bring up the chat window and the participants in case we have some people. We got 11 people today. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate that. Okay. Now let's talk about stored procedures, right? So I'm already logged in using SQL Server Management Studio. And this is the database I'm working on today, IT Impact Order Demo. You'll find stored procedures under your database under programmability, right? So you click here on programmability, click on the plus sign, and you see the stored procedures. These are the stored procedures I have here. If you want to create a stored procedure, you right click, new stored procedure. Now, a stored procedure, think of it as the programming unit in SQL Server. So think of it like VBA for SQL Server. You can pretty much do anything you want in a stored procedure. You can have it do multiple queries. For example, how many of you have ever had the chance to need to create a chain of queries in order to get the final query that you need and then base a report out of that, right? So you got query 1, then query 2 is based on query 1, then query 3 is based on query 2, right? And so on and so forth until the last query in that chain is the one that you attach to a report. That's great if you don't need to do any processing. between queries. But sometimes you do query 1, and then you got to run some VBA code, and then do query 2, and then run some VBA query. So that's where these reports can take a lot longer to do. Well, think of the stored procedure the same way as it can run a query, take the results of that query, run a code against it, then do another query and another query and more code until you have the results that you want that you return back to Access. That's an advanced topic. We won't be talking about that tonight. But you really pretty much can put your mindset into thinking that a stored procedure is like the VBA for SQL Server. Like VBA is to access stored procedures to SQL Server. And inside a stored procedure, you write what's called TSQL, T-SQL, which for the life of me, I forgot what the T stands for. Transact SQL, now I remember now. Now, you probably don't know this, is that SQL is based on international standard. There's an international body that regulates and issues SQL Server commands. And what has Microsoft done? When they created T-SQL, they took all that SQL language and they modified it. They call it T-SQL. So this SQL that you see here is somewhat compatible with the international standard, but it's not the same. Oracle's done the same thing. Oracle also has its own flavor of SQL. I don't know what they call over there because I'm not an Oracle developer. And MySQL probably has the same thing. Each one of those platforms have modified versions of the SQL. So in order to create a stored procedure, you need to become somewhat knowledgeable of T-SQL and a stored procedure. All right. Now this is a template that you see when you create a stored procedure. You do not have to use this template. In fact, I can create a new query window with Control N. Remember that little tip I gave you back in the first class? Let me click here and then Control N. And then here I can click on and create a stored procedure, right? Create, and then, which is misspelled, I can create a stored procedure and start doing that. So I don't have to use a template, but the template is nice. Let's go ahead and talk about through these things. These are commands that you can execute the stored procedures. They're pretty much standard in every stored procedure. I am not a SQL Server expert, so I'm not going to go into the how, what's, and why of these commands, but they help you in terms of this. This is standard text code, right? So you can place your name. In this case, I would place my name, and then the date created and so forth. This is all optional. Notice that these are all comments and they're green. These comments can be collapsed, which is a nice little feature of SQL Server, or you can do it like this. And comments are prefaced with the dash dash. So for example, if I come in here and I press enter, and I start typing select star from customers, right? That is actual valid SQL code. It's not a comment. But if I come in here at the beginning of this line and I do the dash dash, now it's greened out. So anytime you see green like this, it's because it's using that dash dash. We finally get to the meat and potatoes, which is create procedure. This is your new command to create a stored procedure. You replace that with the procedure name here. And then you've got parameter 1, parameter 2. What are they? So they're arguments like they would be in Visual Basic for applications in Access. When you create a function or a stored procedure in Access, you can also have arguments like this, and they are optional. So if you don't need any arguments for your stored procedure, you can just go ahead and delete this entire section like this, right? And then here, after the as, you've got the body of the procedure between the begin and the end. Set no count on is pretty much standard procedure. It does help you not return additional information or data back to Access. And this here is where you start, the fun really start with this. So that's how you create a stored procedure. Let me give you an example of a stored procedure. Let me go ahead and open this one. I'm going to click on modify. All right, and so this is starting with the database. I'm in the database IT Impact Order demo. Do I have to use This database, yes, because the stored procedure is based on this database. I can, in theory, I can create a stored procedure and reference another database on this server, which I have in certain situations, very unique. Here now, because I've already created a stored procedure, when I click on modify, it uses the alter procedure. This is one of the things, that's how I learned T-SQL. When you create a stored procedure, you use the keyword create. And when you modify a stored procedure, you create the keyword alter. It's very similar to view, create view, and alter view. This one takes one parameter, company ID. Parameters are like variables that you can later reference in your code. And just like in Access, you have to define them. So this is an integer, right? And then here, you got the set no count on. And then if not exists, select full name from TBO account, full name accounts payable. And company ID if insert into TBO contacts, right? It's inserting the value in there. Now, what's unique about T-SQL is this if statement, and a lot of you know what if statements are, and you're familiar with the syntax in Access. What is the syntax? If, condition, then. There is no then at the end of this, right? So there is no THEN. That would cause an error if I were to put that there. And as you can see by the red squiggly line, it's in there. So you don't do the then, and you don't have an end if, which is kind of unusual. However, they do support else, so you could put an else in there, right? Why is it that there's no end if? There's no end if because this statement here is this SQL statement here, this insert statement is all one statement, right? The insert command is composed of the table name, the field names that you pick to insert, and then followed by the values. This can be anything. This could be a SQL statement. This can be values like in this here, so forth. So if the condition is true, it executes one line following the if statement here, right? And then finally you got the end. So in this case, if I were to make a change, for example, if I were to say, change this to Juan Soto as the author, and then I execute this query with the execute button, it's going to say command completed successfully. Now, if I click and execute, it'll just recreate, it'll just alter that procedure. And I believe what it's actually doing, the mechanics is it's dropping the procedure and then recreating it from scratch, but I'm not going to go into that. So if I close this window here and ask me don't save, I just don't say don't save. And then I come into here and I look at that procedure again with the modify, you'll see that now my name is back in there, right? Juan Soto. Why is this important? Think of this as a more powerful option than views. It opens a plethora of options for you in terms of processing data. I had an instance once, and this is a real example. You're like, no way, Juan, but yes, it's a real example. The client calls me up and says, hey, Juan, we need you to optimize our access to work with SQL Server. They had 100 employees in that company, and the customer service department was using Access to create orders. And the rep would go in there in Access to create an order, and it would take 30 seconds to start the order process. So they would click on add order, and it would take 30 seconds. Every time they open an order, existing order, it would take 30 seconds. And they had 30 reps at that company. So 30 reps times 30 seconds, you're looking at 50 minutes every time they try to open or edit an order. And they do that constantly. So they were using so many man hours a day, so many days in a week, so many weeks in a month of labor just waiting for that order to open up. So I was pretty intrigued. They called me up. I walked in there. Turns out the prior developer who created the application has zero experience with SQL Server. Zero. He did everything in Access. And I can't blame him because that's all he knew, right? When everything looks like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I went in there, created views, And I created views. In that case, all I needed was views, and it opened in 3 seconds, and probably even less. And so they were amazed, like, "Oh wow, you don't know how you made our lives so much easier." So it went from 30 seconds to probably less than a few seconds, probably even less than a second because it was a local SQL server. My point here is just having your tables in SQL Server and then linking those tables probably is not enough for the more complex databases you guys are working on. Now, I know several of you on this call, several of you are good friends of mine, and I know your situation, and you probably know this already. You know firsthand how Access is great, right? Oh, thank you very much, Ben. Oracle uses PL SQL. What does PL stand in PL SQL, Ben?
I don't know, but I'll look it up.
Okay, thank you very much. And then AVG has a nice little tip there. You can use Control Shift M to open a dialog to populate the parameters. Thank you very much for that, AVG. If you can tell me what the AVG stands for, I'll call you by your first name. All right. Now, having said all that, because you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to use store procedures for everything, right? That's not realistic. Just like you shouldn't have all your queries as views, right? If you have a simple query in Access, it's fine to have that query local in the Access because there's an advantage of having a local query versus a view in Access, and that is queries can become data sources of your forms for your forms, and you can modify the data using the query, right? So I create a query, I bind it to a form, and now I can use that as my order entry screen or my order editing screen and so forth. Thank you very much, Ben. It's called procedural language for SQL. Does anybody know what MySQL calls their flavor of SQL? Put it in the comments there. So for the most part, you want to use native stuff, right? When you create forms, because you most likely you want to edit that form. But we talked about this last month when we talked about views. When you bind a form to a view, it's read-only, which sometimes that's all you need, read-only. What would be an example of read-only form? A search form, right? So if I have a search form like this in Access here, and let's see, search customers, and I've got this really nice search form here, and I can just type a few letters, IT, and then it can shows me everything where the IT is in the letters. It's not using usually we're looking for every company with the word the letter combination of IT in it. So for example, if I put in security here, press enter. Now this is an application that's using SQL Server Backend. Look how quick that was. This is a great example of using a view for your company search and then binding that to the form is read only because you're not editing any data. So what I do here now is I double click on the record and I bring out that company center with a 360-degree view of that company, right? Contacts, proposals, orders, open invoices, closed invoices, right? The whole 360-degree view. So that's a great example of binding a view to a form. Now, would you do that with a store procedure? No. You cannot bind store procedures to forms. However, you can put that store procedure in what's called a pass-through query. And that pass-through query can be bound to your form or your report as read-only because you cannot edit any data that comes back from SQL Server. Why is that? Because, well, I should say qualify that because you could disconnect from the server and then save the local data locally. But for the most part, think of it as read-only because it's the disconnected nature, right? The data sources of those tables. Once you query SQL Server for that store procedure, it stops the connection. It doesn't report it back to SQL Server. So it wouldn't do you any good to modify that data because there's no way to post it back easily back to SQL Server, right? So something like this, I could have used a pass-through query and modify it on the fly with these parameters that apply here, or I can use a view, which was most likely done. So let me show you an example how to create a pass-through query. So you're going to go to Create menu, and you're going to use Create Query Design, right? Well, if you start with a query design, I'm going to do it both ways. So I'm going to start with query design. And you notice that there's several kinds of queries I can do here: cross-tab query, a delete query, a union query. By the way, anytime you use in a make table, append, update, and delete query, those are called action queries. When you hear that term, it's action queries. But what you want here for a proposal for tonight's discussion is what's called a pass-through query. Now notice as soon as I pick pass-through query, and by the way, I'm using a Dart theme, so I apologize if you're not used to this because I deal with computers all day at my job. And at the end of the day, it's just like burns my eyes out. I've converted everything to themes because my eyesight has degraded over the years with all this radiation from the monitors. So I'm using the block theme. So I apologize beforehand. But here I use the pass-through query. Now, if I go back to a select query, I get the query by example grade, right? But I go straight to pass-through. It uses this. Why is it doing that? Why is Access doing that? Because the definition of pass-through is you give it the code you want, anything you like, you can type literally anything you want in this, and all Access does through the ODBC driver is send it to SQL Server, SQL Server processes it, returns the results back. The Access engine doesn't do anything with it. All right. So if I bring up a normal query, for example, here, let me go to my queries here, QRY. All right, so this is a select query. Go to design view. I've got my table and then I've got my grid there in the bottom, which you don't see. This was designed with a bigger monitor than what I have here. Let me see if I can, no, the QBE. There you go. Okay. So you've seen all, every one of you have probably seen all this, right? You create a regular query, you select your fields, you run the query, and so forth. The pass-through queries, Access doesn't know. For example, this could be a actual SQL Server table, TBL estimated line items. Let's see if it is. TBL estimated line items, which it is, right? Estimated line items is a SQL Server table. When you go look at this I'm going to not say that. When you go back to the pass-through query, I could say select star from TBL estimate. Oh, look at this. This is Monaco estimate line items because I'm using Monaco editor SQL Server. I get that IntelliSense, which is pretty nice. Usually, I don't get to use Monaco because my clients haven't upgraded to the latest and greatest version of the Access, so it's nice to have exposure to that. So when I do that, I don't have the ability to drop fields into query by example, rename fields, right? I have to do everything in T-SQL. Now, there's an advantage of this, and that is when you develop your query in Axe and SQL Server, you can just simply copy that and paste it the um, into the Access pass-through query, right? So let me go ahead and create a new query and go back to my new query. I have a new query open now. Let's go ahead and close this and not save it. I'm going to create a new store procedure. New store procedure. Okay. I'm going to call this. Now, when it comes to names, a lot of programmers like to redefine their names as USP. You'll see a lot of that when I go through, look at other people's work. What does that stand for? The U stands for user store procedures, right? So I'm going to say user as USP test. And I'm going to create a parameter called company ID, right? And at all your variables need to start with at company ID int, right? And then here I'm going to say select. This is where you should use this Control Shift M. Yeah, let me try that. I haven't tried that. I have a Mac. I'm using a Mac, so let me see if Control Shift M. Oh, there you go. Okay, nice. So here I can put in the parameter author. Oh, nice. Create date. Never used this before. This is nice. Thank you very much for showing me that to me. All right, and then here I'm going to I'm just going to select, right? I'm going to usually you wouldn't use a select for store procedure. You really use an action, right? Like remove, change the pricing of all your items, and so forth. So select star from TBL estimate line items. Where where is misspelled? Where company ID? No, that's the table. Pick the wrong one. Company ID, right? Company ID. Well, here's the thing. There is no company ID, so I'm gonna say from TBL companies. Let me switch the table. TBL companies. Where company ID equal to the parameter I just applied. I love this IntelliSense. All right. Now, if I want to test this is why I do this. I have a very long stored procedure. I'll test certain aspects of it. So I'll select my query right up to there, and then I'll execute that. It'll come back in with all the records and companies, which is great if you don't have a million record row for companies, right? So that's why we use a word clause. If I were to select the entire thing, the entire query, including my parameter, it's going to give me an error message because I haven't defined that parameter, right? So it says error message must declare scalar variable. I declare it up here. So when you're selecting, executing, it doesn't see in the rest of the procedure here, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and execute the entire thing. I'm going to create my store procedure USP test. I'm going to open a new one, and I'm going to say exec USP test, right? Test. And then it wants the company ID. So I'm going to say, I don't know, 100. I'm going to say, I'm assuming there's one called 100. I execute that, and I get nothing back. So let me see if there is a valid company ID so you can see it. So I'm going to open the TBL companies here. And 8302. All right, so 8302 is a valid number, so I'm going to go back here. Remember I told you about queries? Know the answer before you ask the question. So I know that 8302, and now execute this, and that's the correct company, right? So I know I looked at the actual data. Why do I say know the answer before you ask the question? Because you need to test what you do before you turn it into a client or your company that you work at. And you need to test what the data that you know is correct because maybe I made a mistake and I grabbed instead of TBO company, maybe I put in TBO vendors by mistake because somebody was talking to me at the moment that I put in TBO vendors, whatever that might be, or maybe TBO company addresses instead of companies, right? So it's important that you know the answer before you ask the question. Okay, so we know this works. So now I simply copy this, go back to Access, and we're going to bring up our query that we created, pass through queries. Now, before I can run this cast through query, I need to do something, right? So here, exec USP test. When I try running this, I'm going to get an error message. Why? Because there's no connection string. It wants to know, okay, what data source, right? So we want to avoid. I have a little tip for you guys, how to get to select the connection string quite easily, and that starts with Control G. And here, you can use the table depths collection to get the connection string that you can put there. So if you already have a table that's linked into your database, you can simply do question mark current DB dot table depths TBL companies connect, and whatever that comes back with, which I'm going to show you how that works now. Whatever that comes back with, you can just copy here, Control C, go back to the front end, come here to ODBC connection string, paste it there. All right, so that's a quick and dirty way to put the connection string, find out what connection string is. And now if I run this, of course, USB test, why is it not working now? It was working earlier. So I could not find store procedure. Ah, this is a good point. I created a store procedure, but now nobody has rights to execute or view it. So the connection string is correct, right? But nobody has access. So now the next step in my design, I should know better. I'm going to go ahead and refresh here. And I'm going to go into that USP test, right click, select properties, which I could have done, by the way, with T-SQL. I could assign security rights to everybody here. And I'm going to go to permissions, right here, and I need to grant permissions to my store procedure, right? So right now there's nobody here, right? Nobody has permissions to the store procedure. So I need to, I can search here and I can browse object types. I like to use groups, right? Database roles, maybe, and then click on there and then browse. And then here, public, right? So it means everybody, usually you don't use public, but I can do public here. And now I can do what? Execute the start procedure. Grant execute. So I'm going to say, okay. All right, now I've grant permissions to that procedure, and I can come into access and see if it runs now. We can talk about public in a second here. No, still denied. All right, gotta go back here. This is MySQL. It's just known as MySQL. Okay, thank you very much, Ben, for that. Go back into properties. Okay, what is public? Public is anybody who has access to the server, from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, admin, is considered part of the public group, right? Every user considered part of the public group. So by execute, I mean I can execute the store procedure, view definition. Let's see, with grant. Why am I not be able to run this now? Let's see, click on OK. Go back into access. Click on view. Microsoft 18 SQL Server now find store procedure USP test. Oh, maybe I miswrote it. Maybe it's not called USP test. Yeah, it is called USP test. USP underscore test. Exact USP. I actually copy pasted it, so I know the procedure is correct. Let me go ahead and grant some additional permissions on here. Include the schema DBO permissions. That's good, but it already has a DBO in front of it. Thank you very much for chiming in, George. Add DBO to the name. Oh, I see what you're saying. And Access SQL, go ahead and put DBO in front of it. All right, that's a good point. Let's go ahead and do that. DBO dot exec. Nope, that didn't work either. This brings up a good point. Security at SQL Server is so much more nuanced than Access, right? So you gotta be able to test it from a user perspective because I'm the developer and it works fine for me. Then I turn the beta into a user and they call me back and says, well, I can't run this thing. And you're there saying to yourself, well, what is this wrong? Most likely it's because you haven't done the right permissions on that store procedure and therefore it hasn't worked. Now, one thing is that I may have to reboot Access for it to see the store procedure because there's did you need to trust the server this connection string? Yeah, it's already there. Let me go Shift F2. Let's see if this works. Give me a second. I'm clicking the three dots there. No, still not able to read, looks like. All right. Here, let me go ahead and take an existing pass-through query, modify it. Let me copy this. Control C. Go into the other query. That is pass-through query. By the way, how can you tell they're pass-through queries? Because when you go into a query, they have a little globe attached to it. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm just going to modify one of these. Right click on the connection string and pick zoom. Yeah, I'm using a Mac, so it's not as easy. Let me see if I can run it here now with this. See, it's using the wrong connection string. I'm having problems with my connection string. Oh boy, this is going to cause a problem for me now. All right, so we talked about the use case, right? Use a store procedure. You can use it in a pass-through query, and then you can bind the pass-through query to a form. Same thing with a report. You can bind a stored procedure. You can put a stored procedure in a pass-through query, bind that query to report. Why would you do that? Because sometimes it's a lot faster because the processing occurs on the server, right? So you want to do it that way. Let me cancel this. Let me, what was I going to do? Yeah, let me go ahead and refresh the connection properties on this thing. Control C. Come back here. Property not found. Yeah, I think this is 8302 exec execute. Exec is an abbreviation of execute, by the way. I'm not going to spend too much time. Property not found. Why is that? Oh, I put the wrong thing in there in the connection string. You go back to Control G, right click, copy. No, won't let me copy. Why? Okay, let's do it this way. Control C. Let me see. Right click, copy. No, let me do Control C then. Control C. Let me verify that Control C is working. Mm-mm. Why is that? Let me stop the code. Right click. Why is copy not working for me now? I'm all over the place. It's probably because there's something running here. Let me close this. No, no. I use a Mac as my primary machine, and then I develop using a virtual machine. So it's hard for me to doing up Zoom like Ben suggested because I'm using a Mac keyboard. Yeah, Carl, good point here. Yeah, you have to basically the way it runs on SQL Server is the way you want to run in Access, right? So if it's exec here, if it works here, it should work on Access, right? There's something that's the nuance about this, the pass-through query. The way exactly it works on SQL Server is what you do in SQL Server. But one issue with pass-through queries is you gotta get the connection string working. Which in this case is not. So let me just go ahead and terminate this with prejudice. Let's see if I can do it this way. No, close the program. No, no. Launch it again. We use Oasis to post our code back to Git. And let me go ahead and start the process to authenticate. We have a unique process at Tampa where we use multi-factor authentication. One of the few companies on the planet that figured this out. You'll see it first. You'll see this firsthand how this works when I open this database. All right, so I'm going to enter my email, and now it's using Azure Active Directory to authenticate me. You've all seen this dialog box before when you work with Office 365. I put in my password, and then I have to use my cell phone to authenticate. 25. We actually sell this technology to other third-party companies, so if you're interested in using it, please reach out to me. All right, so now that I did that, I'm back into the program itself. I didn't know that, George. Thank you for sharing that with me. We use this to demo our work to potential clients, right? Because a lot of people, they give us a call and they've never seen a professionally done Access database. So I get a lot of great compliments on this UI. They say, "Oh, it looks like a web app," and I'm like, "Yeah, because it's professionally done." All right, so we're up to 14 people. Thank you very much. All right, so using your store procedures, right? We talked about using it with pass-through queries. Once it's in a pass-through query, you can use it as a form. You can bind it to a report. The third thing you do is running it from your code, right? So in order to run a store procedure from your code, you have to use ADODB. ADODB, active data objects. So I'm going to go in here. You have to go into Tools, References, and you have to enable ActiveX Data Object 6.0 in this case in order to run and create ADODB connection object and so forth. It's pretty tedious to do it over and over again, right? So I'll give you an example of this. I'm going to go into Gemini, Google Gemini AI. We'll start a new chat. I have a store procedure called USP underscore test that uses a parameter called company ID. Create a function that uses company ID as an argument, and use ADODB to execute in my VBA code in Access. All right, I have a store procedure, uses company ID, create the function. To execute, you need to create a command, which is correct. You have to create a command object. You have to use tool references, like I said before. You have to add this. Very good. Love that AI. Very good. Here's the example store procedure. You have to create a connection object. You have to create a command. You have to do commands. You have to do the string. Then you have to define your connection string, which we saw earlier. You have to initialize, and on and on and on it goes. Now, when I first started with SQL Server, God, when I had hair on my head, I would do this constantly, right? Eventually I wised up and I had a template that I would do in every single function and subroutine. And then I told myself there's got to be a better way. So I developed what's called Easy ADODB, which you can find on my website. So if I type in Easy ADODB, this is a framework that I developed, right? And here I'm just going to paste this in for you, and you can download the framework and put it in your program, and then it's a lot easier to execute. And I'll give you an example of that. If you come into my code here, no, don't want to do that. So this is what normally. Oh boy, hold on a second. Let me go back here. This is what you normally would see, right? All this stuff, right? Well, all that gets replaced with. Let's see here. It gets replaced with what? Let me see if I see it here. With one line. Execute my command. When I execute my command, I just simply go ahead and pass a SQL to it, and it does everything for you, right? So you can download the code and execute this framework there because it can get quite tedious. All right. So in Google Gemini, as you can see, I told I was using VBA. I didn't say it was Access. Maybe I should have. Did I say it was Access? Yeah, I did say it was Access. Very good. When you use an LLM, either Copilot, ChatGPT, wherever you prefer it is. I love Gemini. I actually got the pro license up here, as you can see, and do this. You want to have it remember what you do, so you don't have to constantly say, create a store procedure that I use in Access VBA, right? So I'll come in here. I'll say, remember, I am a expert Access developer using SQL Server 2019, and I don't need error handling in my code, right? And so I have these conversations with the LLM. I prep it beforehand. And that way I tell this is my preference. I don't want error handling in my code. I don't want line numbers in my code. I want to do right. I'm using all this. So you're an expert and want to skip the error handling. Here's a streamlined code using right. Now, reason why we don't have error handling in IT Impact is because we use VBA Watchdog to handle error catching. That's called VBA Watchdog, and we use this instead. You can go to vbawatchdog.org. Is that the right website? No, I'm
It's
not
VB
sure.
Watchdog.
VB Watchdog. Okay, sorry. Thank you. VB Watchdog. Ben has saved my butt so many times. Everything access. Yep, that's great. That's the right. That's the right way. So I use that for error handling, which is a much better approach to error handling and access. That's a whole separate topic. And so you want to prep write this now. Usually, what I do is when I start with an LLM is I have this prompt and I tell it, ask me 5 questions about what I do, right? To further clarify what I need, what is it I do, what my roles are, and so it asks me all this, right? So ask me 5 questions to better understand what I do. Okay? And then I'll train the LLM and do you prefer the send list? Which is a great question. Yes, I absolutely do, right? So I'll type in one, yes. And then two, question number two, logic, what is your preferred split for business lines? For example, do you aim for a thin client, access strictly a UI layer for SQL Server, or do you keep some thin client? So I'm going to type in thin client. Oh, these are great questions. Sometimes I have creative blog articles based on these questions because I'm constantly doing this for other stuff, which I'll be showing you guys in April. I have a topic on how you maximize AI access development with AI. Right, so I answer the questions and so forth. There's a reason why I'm answering these questions now. Let's see, for number three, deployment version. How do you fund the implement update? Actually, do you use a custom auto updaters? Yes. Yes, I use a custom updater. Four, data caching performance. Do you make heavy use of local sidecar tables for session or high speed, or do you find SQL Server performance? Performance is fine. And then finally, five, security. Are you strictly using Windows Authentication? Windows Authent. All right, I'll do that. And sometimes they'll come back for another 5 more questions. All right. And you end up in this loop where it's asking you constantly questions on that. All right. So this, I would have killed for this technology way back when I was starting for SQL Server, right? Because think about how many times you take a function or subroutine that you currently have in Access and you want to migrate it to T-SQL. I know Ben and Wendy and George would have loved to have these tools way back when they were doing these complex systems. And some of you still are doing complex systems. I know Ben and Wendy are still doing a lot of complex systems these days. Yeah, I'm sure you're leveraging AI. And I hope you can be here in April when I do the AI session, which is probably going to be multiple months because it's a lot that we're going to cover to do that. Some simply amazing stuff, which I will be previewing at Access Day that Armenstein is putting together in March. So if you're in Seattle for that week with Access MVP for the MVP Summit in Seattle, I'll be presenting. I've been selected to present on how to maximize access development using AI. So if you're going to be there, I'll be there in person. Hopefully you can join us for that session. George hopefully will be there as well because George lives in Seattle, so it'll make it a lot easier for him to be there. Access Day is coming to you in March, so more details to follow on that. Okay, so here's the thing about AI, right? It can be wrong. I've catch it lying to me, right? And so being an access expert and somewhat of a SQL Server user, I know that some stuff it tells me is wrong, right? So I always wanted to double check. I don't want to be that lawyer that references fake cases and submits their brief to the court, and they just get caught later saying we couldn't find these cases. Oh, it's because I used ChatGPT and the damn thing was wrong. Right? Embarrassing. I don't want to have that same experience with my clients, right? And so one of the things that uh, I do is I have it started for me, right? So if I identify a procedure here that I want to convert into SQL Server, right? I can do that. So a good example is a function, right? So say for example I do Control F and I do function in my project. Find next, right? Private function validate site, right? So let's take a look at this. Now this is probably not a good example because it's validating a URL. So let's go ahead and find the next one. Function, find next. BGV, no, not a good example. Right GV, no. Function delete GV, no. Validate AUG, update VV name. Let's see here. I'm getting good examples here. A lot of this stuff is not relevant. Okay, here we go. So copy from SQL Server modules allow GV. No, that's not good. Let's see. Okay, prepare SQL number. All right. This is a subroutine we use a lot, right? And so I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna bring it over to Gemini or ChatGPT, whatever your poison is. Prefer your poison for LLM. Convert convert the following to a store procedure. No, I don't tell it it's access. I don't tell it it's a what a function does, right? Because I say remember I'm an access developer, so it should know beforehand that I'm probably talking about a function that uses an access. You typically don't need to prepare numbers for SQL Server, right? Here we go. Now, try cast returns null if the value. I love these comments that inserts in there. So it's actually teaching you how to does it. But this is an example of else, by the way. If it's not null, else, and so forth. Now, what happens usually is when you're developing mission critical applications with SQL Server is, let's say for example, the client calls me up and says, "Juan, inflation is rampant. I need a way to raise my prices and all my items of meat by 2% or 3%, right? Where I supply the percentage and it raises the prices of all the beef in my inventory, right? So they call me up, I create a nice little form that only administrators can run, and they enter the percent they want to increase meat prices. They collect the category. Maybe it's fish, meat, right? Whatever the category is. When you have a mission critical application like that where you're chasing pricing, you want to be able to do a extensive um, error handling, right? So that the transactions are all committed to the database and everything is okay, and then you commit to the database. What am I saying by this? When you have, let's say for example, you have 5 million rows that need to be increased by a certain percentage, like 2%, right? That's a lot of rows, right? Or 10 million rows. The database doesn't instantly update them all in a microsecond. What happens is when you have that much data, it takes a little bit to do that. Now, say for example, I'm in there and I want to increase prices by 5%, and Ben, a friend of mine in accounting, he's editing the product beef name, right, of the product. He's changing the name of the product, and he's got that record locked in SQL Server. So I'm not able to go in there and increase the pricing because at the same time he's editing the name. So of all the 5 million rows, one of them doesn't get updated. And if you're not careful how you write your store procedures, you want to be able to commit that transaction when all of them are updated. Otherwise, it rolls back all that and comes back with error handling, right? So that how can I say this? It alerts the user that it couldn't commit those changes. So you have to factor all of those things in when you create a store procedure because the last thing you want to do is The client's like, oh yeah, increase the, and by the way, you don't want to do that in Access. You don't want to create a query in Access to update 5 million rows because you'll be there forever. It'll take probably 30 minutes and it might end up crashing your Access database and never go through, right? Access was not designed to do massive updates, inserts, or massive updates into SQL Server databases. You want to do that either on a SQL Server Managed Studio or using a pass-through query. You can literally go and have a coffee, talk with everybody at the water cooler, come back, and it still might not be done. And then it might start and never finish, and now you have some rows that increase by 2%, the other ones that don't. Or you might want to back up those records before you update the pricing. Now you have two operations, right? You have the backup, and then you have the update to the database. And so one may should not occur without the other one. So if the backup fails, right, the export that data into a temporary table or a backup table fails, it should not proceed with updating the pricing of the products. You have to think about worst case scenarios when you do stuff like that on large amount of data record sets. All right, so let's go ahead and supply that situation to the AI. I have a product table, product table called TBL products, and I wish to create store procedure that will update the price of meats. Category ID, category ID equal 1. Let me see, am I writing that? I know category. I managed to misspell this. Category ID 1. I'm just spitballing here the category ID. By a percent supply as a parameter. Create a store procedure. A store procedure. Now, usually you have backups, right? That you run probably back up the whole database. But for whatever reason, I want to create a backup of the records in a separate table. Create a store procedure that will back up the records to a history table. Then update the pricing on using field price. Make sure the procedure rolls back if the backup fails or the price update fails. All right, so I'm telling you to create the store procedure not for running an Access, but rather store for SQL Server. Now, it may come back and ask me questions about, what other questions, right? Tables and so forth. Let's just see how it says atomic operation, backup, and update with a T-SQL transaction, which is correct. All right, update meat prices. Begin try. So that's the error handling, right, in SQL Server, the begin try. Begin transaction, right? Backup existing meat records to history. Assume TBO product history has a similar schema, right? Insert into TBO history. I mean, I should have probably supplied the schema if I'm going to be doing this, right? In a separate file, which I'll be showing you how to do that in April, by the way. All right, and then it does the update the pricing, right? Based on the percentage. I supply it. And then it commits the transactions. But if it can't commit, then it begins with its cache and it rolls back. If transaction count greater than 0, roll back in the transaction. We throw the error to be caught by the calling application, right? That's how you properly create a store procedure like this where you have that begin transaction, commit transaction, begin cache, and so forth. And then I can just copy this here, go back to SQL Server Managed Studio, do Control N, paste it there, And now I've got my thing about. Of course, it's going to throw error message because I don't have a product table, category, detail, or anything like that. All right. Any questions regarding what we discussed tonight? Anybody have any questions? Open up the mic. Let us know your thoughts, questions, comments, and so forth.
Juan, can you please paste some of your prompts into the chat?
Sure. No problem. What's your favorite LLM, by the way, that you like to use?
I'm not really using it for work yet, so I would use Gemini.
Okay, good. Yeah. Let me copy this prompt. Let me copy here, copy, and paste that into the chat.
Thank you.
Hey, Juan.
Yes.
I saw that your Access crashed. I just posted in the chat a little tip. It's a newer feature I discovered where you can right click on your taskbar icon for Access and just tell it to end task.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Look, the fact is we've got more and more Access developers retiring. The old guard, the OGs, right? The OGs. George Hepworth, which is on this call, he retired many years ago. He still helps out companies from time to time. Uh, I'm not considering retirement because when I asked my wife when can I retire, she said never, right? So I'll retire until I can, I'll retire when I'm senile, don't understand what the client's asking me for. There goes old man Soto on a rant again about how he used to program Access before the internet, right? Then they'll make me retire. But the fact is, now is probably one of the better times to be an Access developer because I'm getting calls from people who want to sell me their practice. They'll call me up and says, "Hey, I'm considering retirement. It's entered into a deal." And so we're doing a lot of M&A these days, and helping people because really what they want to do it boils down to is they want their clients taken care of, and they want to make sure they have a little revenue stream there for a few years before they go on to bigger and better things. What I'm saying is, if you were an expert in this field, you're having a similar situation with the COBOL programmers had in 2000, year 2000, where you're going to be in high demand here, and people think they can use an LLM to become an access expert. Oh yeah, I'll just use an LLM, and but it's not an expert, and you might make mistakes, and you got to be careful with that. And one of the things that I'm going to emphasize is in my April session here is how you can force it to be more accurate. I have prompts and I have a methodology you're going to love to force it to be more accurate because you want steady, consistent results. All right. The other day, I asked it to create an image for me, and I thought it was hilarious because it did a terrible job. Let me see. I have if you're in Ohio, by the way, I have a AI workshop coming up in March. You can go to itimpact.com/Ohio. You want to join us. Let me share my screen one last time. Windows, all right, share. I said, hey, I got this event in Ohio. Can you create a road sign for me that I can use to promote, right? AI Business Workshop, IT Impact, Unleash Growth in Akron. Bring your laptop and do AI. Leave with results, right? And I got the seal QR code. I was doing these images, and then let's see, I had some other stuff here. Let's see. Oh, I was playing around with prompts for different portraits of myself as a superhero and so forth. This is hilarious. I look like myself in that one. Here's me as a superhero. Let me see. I thought I had something I wanted to show you. I've been playing around with this so much these days with image generation. I had something that was hilarious, but I can't remember what it was. For some reason, it's not showing up here. Oh, I've got this blog post on IT Impact where it talks about what happens if AI goes rogue, right? We created it became AGI, right? AI becomes sentient. And one of my laws, I have 4 laws of AI. I talk about, the law like Isaac Asimov has his 3 laws of robotics. I created the 4 laws of AI. You can read that at itimpact.com. And one of them is, once you create it, there's no way bringing it back into a bottle, right? It'll self-preserve and copy itself some obscure server on the planet, and there's no getting rid of it once you create an AGI, AIGI. So that's what the whole point of this T-shirt was. I was thinking about creating T-shirts and selling our AI law number 1. Once created, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? That was that. AI law number 2: assume any control of the AI will eventually be lost. This is my second law of AI, where the illusion of control. You have to assume eventually you're going to lose control of the AI. So that's AI law number 2. AI law number 3: to coexist with sentient AI, it needs to be a win-win situation for both humanity and the AI, right? In other words, you can't expect it to be a one-way street. You have to have that symbiotic circuit design. So these were all T-shirt designs based on my blog post. AI and humanity, win-win or game over. The or is there twice. And AI number 4: the only way to defeat an AI in battle is with another AI. So I came up with these laws, like Isaac Asimov. And then what Isaac Asimov did after he created the 3 law of robotics, he proceeded to write these books where he breaks the laws. If you are Isaac Asimov avid reader, you'll know that he created the laws and then proceeded to break every single one of them in his stories. But my contention with AI law number 4 is, if you want to do battle with a rogue AI, you have to create another one, start from scratch with another one, win it over, and have it work for you in the battle with the other AI. Let me see if there's another law. I think. Nope, that's it. All right. Would you like the URL for this article, by the way? Let's see if I have the URL here. Show thinking. Here delay. Okay, it's at itimpact.com. Let's see. Here we go. Laws of AI. 4 laws of AI. Let me copy this over. I know it's not part of this thing here, but spitballing here. I'm just fascinated by this whole topic of AI, as you can imagine. And so now that we're data and AI partners for Microsoft, I'm even more so. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for a wonderful session coming out here today. It's probably sorry for the technical problems. You can always reach me at accessexperts.com or AccessUserGroups.org. We have other sessions throughout the month. Looking forward to next month. We're going to be talking about CTEs in SQL Server Management Studio, how to leverage those. It's an advanced topic. And then in April, we start our series on AI optimization. I was going to start in March, but since I got selected to be a speaker in AI Access Day, I decided to push it out because to give you exclusivity to Armin Stein and his organization. Thank you very much, everybody. Talk to you next month. So long.